If you're a parent of a child who struggles with sensory processing disorder, then this story may sound very familiar to you. Your child struggles getting ready for school in the morning. Maybe they don't want to put on their socks or their shoes, or they don't want to put their clothes on at all. Maybe they have meltdowns during the school day. It's hard for them to transition from one activity to the next, and it causes disruption in the classroom, which embarrasses your kiddo in front of their friends and their peers. Or maybe they just can't wind down at the end of the day, and bedtime is an absolute struggle, leaving you as a parent exhausted, frustrated, and ready to pull your hair out. So if that story sounds familiar, then watch this video to the end, because I'm going to share with you what is sensory processing disorder, really what's happening in the brain, and why you should seek help with a practitioner to get your kiddo from breaking down to breaking through. Hey, I'm Dr. Sam McDonald, brain health expert, helping you rewire your brain so you can live a better life. If you love this content, make sure to like and subscribe so you get the notifications for each week's new video. So let's start with what is sensory processing disorder. Well, it's really a disorder of an input problem up into the brain. It's where the brain does not perceive the body correctly, thus leading to problems with things like behavior, transitions, and outbursts, because the brain is not perceiving what the heck is happening correctly. So, for example, a kiddo who maybe has problems wearing socks or doesn't want to get dressed in the morning, instead of their brain perceiving the socks being the soft, comfortable, warm thing, maybe their brain is perceiving it more like sandpaper, or maybe even in the worst case, broken glass. And that sensation on the skin is a problem because the brain now cannot put its attention elsewhere. All it can focus on is this discomfort feeling coming from the feet, which is then going to cause these emotional outburst sensations because your kiddo's brain cannot think of anything else except how uncomfortable this feels on their foot. And it's not that they're acting out, it's literally that their brain is not perceiving this appropriately. Now, there are often two kinds of sensory processing categories that we really see in practice. There's the sensory avoiders and there's sensory seekers. And each of these kids is going to have very different types of personalities, very different types of challenges when they come into the office. So a sensory avoider, what's really going on here is the brain is not guarding or gating the information coming to the brain, which means there's too much coming in. So how the brain works and what's going on is you have information coming from the body. It travels from, let's say, the hand through the sensory nerves of the hand into the spinal cord, up to the brain, through the brainstem, which we'll talk about, and then it's going to go through a part of the brain called the thalamus. The thalamus is like a secretary in the brain that's constantly cataloging and filing information, and it's like a big routing station. So it's sending information here and there and front and back and left and right. And with a sensory avoider, too much information is going up through that secretary. They're letting too many people into the nightclub, so to speak. So too much information is coming in, so they can step into an environment like maybe a crowded coffee shop or a restaurant or something like that, and it's just too much. There's too much noise, there's too much smell, there's too much stimulation, and when that happens, the brain and nervous system is going to go into survival mode, aka sympathetic mode, aka gas pedal mode. Now the kiddo is thinking constant fight or flight, danger, and I have to get the heck out of here. So a sensory avoider is going to have more of an anxiety type challenges because there's just too much stimulation in the environment. Now the opposite of that is what's called a sensory seeker. And this is where the brain is doing the exact opposite. It's not letting enough information coming into the brain, which means they're going to be constantly seeking that stimuli out. They're going to be wanting to touch every single thing around them. They like a lot of real deep pressure hugs, so big squeezes and those kind of things. They want the music turned up loud. They're just constantly needing stimulation so they can't sit still. So it kind of looks like an ADHD type of kiddo because their brain's craving and seeking all of this information. Now, the question is really, how does this happen in the brain and what parts of the brain are involved? So there's a few different parts of the brain, and this is really oversimplified for you guys to understand, but the big areas that we focus on when it comes to sensory processing is one, the brain stem. So the brain stem is in the back of the brain, the lowest part, and it's the first part of our brain to develop. It's really the connection between our brain up here and our spinal cord out to the rest of the body. So when the brainstem is involved, what we typically look for are things that are called retained primitive reflexes. These are like the training wheels for the brain. Their whole job is to get the nervous system and the body up and walking in that first year of life so that then you can go on and do more advanced type of tasks and skills. But when the brainstem is damaged, what happens is information is coming from the body, and it's kind of like driving on a big super highway, an 8-lane highway that's paved and glass smooth, and all of a sudden you hit a gravel road in that brainstem. And now that information starts to get garbled, and it's kind of like playing the old game telephone. When it hits that brainstem, that information gets garbled, it gets routed up through the brain, and now it's not the same information that was coming from the body. Meaning that soft, warm, comfy sock now feels like broken glass up in the brain because it got garbled. Now, the other area that's typically involved, like I mentioned, is the thalamus, and finally, the final area that's involved is what's called the parietal lobe, which is the back of the brain. And that part of the brain is really our map of the body that gives us the proper sensation and proper text and tone and everything else for what's happening in the body. So when that information gets garbled, it doesn't get processed appropriately, and you get the wrong information up in that parietal lobe, which is then going to feed the improper responses to your frontal lobe, which is going to change that outburst of behavior. So again, that sock doesn't feel warm and comfy. It feels like broken glass or sandpaper. That hits the parietal lobe, which is, oh my gosh, get this thing off of me. Fire that stressed nervous system to act out so we can get out of this dangerous situation, and that's what feeds up to the frontal lobe right here. So you get a kiddo who puts on a sock and all of a sudden they get agitated and irritated because their brain's not perceiving it appropriately. Now I want to address another question that often comes up is, why should I seek help for this? One, will my kid will just grow out of it? And two, can I just try and fix this problem on my own? Well, what we typically see with things like sensory processing is, no, your kiddo doesn't grow out of it, they grow into something more severe, because most likely, like a lot of the kiddos that we see with sensory processing challenges, is they had earlier problems in their life, meaning they were either born premature, once they were a baby, they had problems with things like colic, constipation, or ear infections. They then were a kiddo that's likely was sick all the time. They maybe had some kind of food allergies, and now they've grown into the sensory processing challenge, which probably comes along with problems like focus and attention. Again, those emotional outbursts in school, or even problems with sleeping. What this manifests into later on is then we see bigger problems with things like anxiety, depression, more mental wellness type issues, and even problems with self-esteem, and ultimately a problem with a productive, healthy adult who doesn't have a good perspective in the world. All because the brain is not perceiving its internal and external environment appropriately. So the next question is, okay, well, can I just fix this on my own? Yes, you can. Of course, you can try and do anything on your own. We never advise that, because there's certain things that you need to look for when it comes to a sensory kiddo. One is this a bilateral problem? Meaning, is this happening on both sides of the body? Usually it's not. Usually one side is actually going to be more sensitive than the other, which is going to give us an indication that yes, there's problems in the brainstem, but there's also problems with the brain being out of balance, meaning that maybe the left side of the brain is running way faster than the right. It's much more dominant than the right, which that can bleed into other problems again down the road too, because this is going to start to lead to that imbalance of skills and that imbalance of perception of the world. So often what we'll see with sensory processing challenges, if it's involved more on the right side of the brain, is that a kiddo is going to have a less functioning right side of the brain. So they're going to tend to be a lot more aggressive, a lot more dominant, a lot less social than a kiddo who is the opposite, where if the right brain is more dominant, they're going to be more emotional, a lot less focused in school, and they're going to have a lot more problems with regulating emotions. So all these different things come up when the brain becomes imbalanced. And why this is a problem, or if you don't have a practitioner who understands what's going on, is you can make the problem worse if you're trying to fix it on your own. So if you're stimulating one side of the body and you just keep doing that over and over and over again, or if you keep doing both sides and the brain is imbalanced, you're trying to stimulate both feet at the same time, what you're doing is you're just increasing the function of both sides of the brain without ever correcting that imbalance or that deficit from one side to the other. So again, a trained eye is going to pick up on a lot of these things that you may miss if you don't have the proper context or understanding of how the brain develops. Another common question that we get is, really, how did this happen? Where did this come from? And the most common origins of where we see sensory processing from, again, this is a neurological problem. The most common factors that we see with kiddos with sensory processing is either a premature birth, some kind of birth intervention, meaning C-section, forceps, or vacuum extraction, sometimes even episiotomies and those kind of things if they have to be able to really pull the baby out. And then we also see challenges in terms of development in that first year of life, meaning they either walked or crawled too early or too late. They had problems with speech, too early or too late, or just problems with speech in general, or they have problems or some kind of intervention in that first couple of years of life, meaning they fell, hit their head, or those kind of things. So a problem with birth interventions and what happens there is that it causes damage to the brainstem. So anytime there's a C-section problem, there is a forceps or vacuum extraction or those kind of things, that creates axial traction on the spine. And specifically, that creates a vertical traction or a pulling force on that brainstem area. So in your spine, that brainstem comes down to about your second cervical vertebrae here. Now, the skull and your very top bone in your neck, called your atlas bone, are basically almost joined together with all the different structures and soft tissues around them. Now, C2 and everything below is almost separate from that when you start to pull, which is going to create that pulling or vertical type force, which causes damage to this brainstem area. Now, typically, it will take anywhere from 18 to 20 pounds of force to cause damage to the area in an infant. Typical C-sections or vacuum or forceps type forces are anywhere in the neighborhood of around 80 to 90 psi, or pounds of square, or pounds of force, whatever the acronym is going to be there, pounds of force put on that area. So about 8 to 9 times more than what's actually going to be healthy in that area is going to create a lot of damage, which is then going to cause that whole brainstem dysregulation, lack of growth and development, and problems setting up this whole cascade going forward. Now again, traumatic brain injury is fairly self-explanatory. Damage to the brain is going to cause it to malfunction, which is going to cause some of these problems to manifest going forward. So seeking out a practitioner is going to be huge for the health and development of a kiddo and getting them back on track so that they can absolutely go from breaking down to breaking through and accessing all of their potential, avoiding them from stepping into these bigger problems later on in life where it's much more difficult to not only correct, but it's much more damaging to their life going forward, because obviously as we get older, the stakes get bigger in our life. The more things and the more responsibilities that we have, and we just can't live out the fullest expression and the best expression of ourselves. So if you love this content, please comment, please share it with a friend if you know they are struggling with or have a kiddo that's struggling with sensory processing issues. Or if you're watching this as a parent and you have a kiddo that's struggling, then please reach out to our office. This is an expertise and a specialty that we thrive and help kiddos break through to be their best selves. So on that note, you should be healthy by choice, not by chance, and for that reason, I will see you on the next video.